Yeah, g'day, you nine. So I came across a little competition I thought was interesting that some of us might like to do over the next couple of weeks. It's a competition run by the Australian Tax Office, and it has two year levels. One which is the younger, which is grades 7 to 9, which ideally suits yourselves as the oldest people in that category. And the topic for year 7 to 9 students is explain how, when, and why Australians pay tax. So in this little presentation, I've put together a little bit more information about the competition and then some thoughts on that topic. What's some of the information we could use in that topic? Here's the brochure for the competition. The prizes are quite generous. So the first three entries each will receive $1,000 individually and $1,000 for the school. There are also some highly commended prizes, which would look really great on a resume, for example, or just a nice achievement to take some pride in. And it's not due until the 27th of September, so there's plenty of time. Even if people who are interested in doing it didn't quite finish this term, I'd be happy to help into next term to get entries ready. Now, the competitions say that you can enter pretty much anything. You have a look there. They're talking about you can have you can write a poem if you want. You can sing a song, create an app. But the primary thing from previous competitions is that people were filming it. So all three prize winners last year in the grade 7 to 9 category filmed their presentations. So I think it's probably worth thinking about whether filming isn't a really nice way to be both creative and put some information across. And I would suggest that something in the order of like 5 to 7 minutes is ideal. I noticed one really creative entry last year was only about 3.5, maybe 4 minutes long. So it doesn't have to be super long. And they won a prize. They won a $1,000 prize themselves and for the school, or whatever the prize was last year. So the question is, why would you do it? First of all, I think it's a great real life topic. Every time you go shopping, you're already paying a little bit of tax. As you get jobs, you're going to be thinking about income tax. Maybe as you get a little older, you'll start thinking about taxes that relate to investment. Taxes are an important part of the way we engage with society. I think it could look great on a resume. I've put an example there, the way you can put the fact that you're entrant down. You don't have to have one, just the fact that you're entrant and participated. You can make a really nice little story around that, the skills that you show, the leadership, the teamwork, a nice thing. And on the topic of teamwork, you can do it individually or as part of a team. And as I said, the prizes are interesting. And when I looked at the videos from last year, and you can jump on that website, it's down on the bottom of the brochure. You can jump on the website or just use a Google search to find it. And you'll see they were creative, they were interesting, but I don't think they're anything that you guys can't put together yourselves. So information useful to the topic. So having had a thought about whether you want to do it, I just want to give you a little bit of basic information so you can see, these are the sort of things we could put into a presentation. I reckon there are 3 key taxes that are worth knowing about. The GST, every time you go and buy something, you pay an extra 10% on the purchase price. Income tax, say as you start working, you'll see that income tax gets taken out of every pay. And company tax, it's a big source of tax, that's why I put it in there. It's an important source of tax for the government. And basically companies pay 30%. Some companies pay a little bit less, but it's around 30% is just the normal rate. We've been looking at this, so we've actually got some interesting perspective. This is the 5-sector model that we've looked at. This is a version that I quite like. And you can see when we talk about tax that both businesses and households pay tax. So the GST would be an example of a household income tax as well, and businesses tend to pay company tax. The government, they're spending money on welfare and other services. We'll see particularly how much the federal government spends on that, and also on services that businesses might use. So let's have a look at the first tax, the GST. The question asks how, when, and why. So we're going to look at the why later, but the how and when of GST is it's 10% that's added onto most goods and services you buy. Some are exempt, for example, fresh foods. And if you have a look at a receipt when you go shopping, or the adults at home go shopping, you'll probably see the GST noted there. That brings us to the second tax that people pay, and that's income tax. And for most people who have a job, that tax is taken out every fortnight. There's like an estimation of how much tax you have to pay over the year. We have what's known as a progressive tax system in Australia, and that is the more you earn, the more you tend to pay in tax. And in fact, for most of you who start working, you won't pay any tax at all for a little while. With a part-time job, you won't earn over that first 18,000. But once you do, you then start to pay a little bit. Any money that you earn between 18,000 and 45, you pay at a 19% tax rate, and then a little bit higher, 30% for the money earned between 45 and 200,000. And for those lucky enough to be earning more than $200,000, they're paying 45 cents in every dollar they earn over that amount of money. So how does it happen that you pay this money? Generally, it gets taken out of your pay. So as a teacher, I get a pay slip every fortnight, and there's a bunch of tax that has been taken out of that. Then at the end of the year, I have to lodge a tax return, and it says, well, how much have you earned, both from your job and any income that you earn from, say, investments or having money in a bank account, you add that all up. You might have some deductions. So you might have donated some money to charity, for example, or made some work-related expenses. For example, if you bought some specific subject-related textbooks, perhaps that might be an expense that you can claim. So that reduces your income, and you do a little calculation, or the Australian Tax Office does a calculation and says, okay, you have had this much taken out of your pay, this is what you actually owe, and you might have to pay a little bit extra, or you might get a little refund back if they've taken out more over the year than you owe. Let's have a look at the third tax, company tax. And this is important, I think, just because of the sheer amount of money that it generates. It's a really significant contributor to the amount of money the federal government has. Full tax rate, 30%. Businesses that are operated through a company pay this tax. So if you have a look at all the big businesses listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, businesses like Woolworth, Telstra, Domino's Pizzas, they're going to be companies that are paying tax. Often they'll pay a regular instalment through the year, much like we pay, employees pay income tax out of their pay. They'll often pay a regular instalment, and then they'll do an annual calculation of the tax they owe. So those were the how and when. The question of why is then the next thing that they ask you to think about. Well, one of them is it's the law. You have to pay tax. The rule is if you earn a certain amount of income, you're paying tax. And you could go into a little bit of detail around that. But the other thing around paying tax relates to that 5-sector model that we looked at and the way it's used. GST we looked at first. Now GST is then split between the states. So the idea is that the federal government collects it, but they split it between the states. And it's always, as you can imagine, the states are always trying to get as much money as they can. The Queensland government wants as much money for Queensland as they can, the Tasmanian as much money for Tasmania, and so on. And so there's an article there that is quite interesting and that looks at the way it's split up. But the important thing about GST is it goes to the states. So if we want to say the why of that, we have to look at what the states do with the money. Here's a little example of the financials for Queensland, and it shows that there's going to be around $20 billion. It's a little bit less at the moment, $20 billion out of $80 or $90 billion of total government revenue. So the GST is about a quarter of the money that Queensland government receives, and they spend it on a bunch of things. The number one thing they spend it on is health. So the hospital systems that run in Queensland are largely funded by the Queensland government. The second thing, education. And you can see then the other things that they spend money on. Social protection. Housing is a big issue at the moment. There's a lot of talk about increasing the amount of housing that's available for people. Transport, a combination of roads as well as helping with some public transport. So that's the why we pay tax. That's where the GST goes. Let's have a look at our income tax. Now the income tax and the company tax go to the federal government. So what do they spend it on? This is a really interesting addition to tax returns. It started happening, I think, about 8 or 10 years ago, and it shows where the money is spent from. And the federal government spends most of their money on welfare. So that's older Australians. They pay age pension, which is a payment to people who are retired. Generally, that happens at age 67. And it does depend on the level of assets you've got. But aged care is the big spending there, in the welfare, which is the biggest part of what federal government spends money on. Then disabilities, then families, and then unemployment benefits. They also spend an amount of money on health. Defence is something different. So defence is one of those rules that are set out that only the federal government can pay a role in. So our Defence Force costs us there is part of where that money is spent. They also spend money on education. And this shows exactly the same thing, but in a different sort of way, that the biggest amount of payments is social security and welfare, followed by health. You can see defence and education in there as significant amounts of spending. So that answers those questions of where taxes come from and why why we pay taxes. And if you can find a creative way to put some of that information together, I think it's well worth thinking about this possible competition.